Good afternoon to all the listeners who are tuned to the Education Around the World with me, Sophia Wright. Now, the other day I came across an article titled Best Education in the World, Finland and South Korea Top Country Rankings from the Huffington Post. And this article kind of talked about how America's education system was falling shortly behind a numerous of other countries' education systems. The number? Well, according to the same article, which cites their source from a global report done by the education firm Pearson, America comes in at number 17 as it relates to academic performance. America falls behind countries like Finland and South Korea, who top the list of 40 developed countries with the best education systems. Now, I want to talk about this topic because it's kind of interesting to me. And no, I didn't expect America to be number one. That's not really the interesting part. What interests me is the relationship between countries like South Korea and their high performance in education. Understand that the relationship between a country and their success in education is going to differ from country to country. But I really want to focus on South Korea, use them as an example so you all can understand some reasons why America is underperforming against several education systems around the world. So, with that being said, that's the direction today's shows will be centered on, the relationship between South Korea and their high performance in education. Now, I personally believe that it's not so much the fact that South Korea places great emphasis on their education system as a society for the reason why they excel in academics as a country. However, I do believe it's the pressure placed on students to excel in their studies that has allowed this specific country to have one of the top education systems in the world. I want to start this discussion off with examining South Korea's past as it relates to their education system and the students being pressured, and then transition into how that pressure still exists today. To begin, I read an article by Sungwon Hong entitled Democracy and Human Rights Education in South Korea, which kind of details South Korea's history as it relates to their education system. It explains how harsh South Korea's education system was after they gained their independence from Japan. At the time, education was the center point of every family because there was fear built into the families that if the child did not get the proper education, then they were not going to succeed in life. Education Fever, Society, Politics, and the Pursuit of Schooling in South Korea, which is a book written by Michael Seth, also talks about how South Korea gained their independence from Japan, and it kind of goes a little further by mentioning that most Koreans were still illiterate after gaining independence, and there was only one college in the country at the time. South Korea did not have that many schools in the country, therefore this constraint made it tougher for students to get accepted into college, putting pressure on them to excel in school. Now, if the shoe was on the other foot, I would probably be excelling in school too. Imagine being in a country where there's not a lot of schools available, and the country has low funds for public education, which was mentioned in Democracy and Human Rights Education in South Korea. It would indeed be tough to get an education, and I can see how putting that kind of pressure on a student will allow them to go above average in their studies. Hong's article, Democracy and Human Rights Education in South Korea, also elaborates on how in the past the pressure was so severe for students to excel in their studies that teachers were even allowed to hit students with a ruler or a stick, kick them, and then verbally abuse them. Some desperate students ended up committing suicide. Hong mentions that an honor student killed herself while leaving behind a suicide note that read, "Happiness is not the same as an examination." You may be asking yourself, does this pressure still exist today? Well, according to Kelly Myers' documentary in high school in South Korea, it still does. The documentary was released in 2011, so it wasn't that long ago. And it shows that several Korean teenagers in their last year in high school, which according to the documentary is the most stressful time of their lives, they have to take one last exam that lasts for 9 hours, which will determine their future economic and social status for the rest of their lives. This documentary contains interviews from several Korean students in which they discuss the 16 hours a day of studying they have to do and how most students attempt to commit suicide because of the pressure. Having to study for countless of hours just to take a 9-hour test that could possibly determine your future status in a society is a lot of pressure. Now, I want to share an excerpt from the documentary where a male Korean student comments on the students committing suicide in South Korea. He states, maybe they committed suicide because of their own expectations, or maybe they couldn't face their parents because they believe they failed their parents. So it's just something is wrong. Truthfully, taking tests and going to college, the reason for studying, there are probably lots of reasons for doing those things. But committing suicide just because you didn't do that well, that doesn't make sense to me. But that in itself is kind of a representation of how there's obviously a huge problem in our education system. Now, he said representation. And can we agree on this? If you have a number of students committing suicide because of the pressure that is placed on them, which then transforms into stress, can we safely assume that is representation that something is wrong with their education system? I think we could. Now, with all that in mind, I hope that my notion about the pressure placed on students to excel in their studies have allowed South Korea to have one of the top education systems in the world is true to you all as it is true to me. And on that note, thank you guys for tuning into Education Around the World, and I hope to speak with you all next time. Goodbye.